Welcome everybody at our iSpring Solutions webinar series, where every week we talk about e-learning trends, share iSpring tips and tricks, and cover clients' cases. I'm Paulina Ionina, a community manager at iSpring, and I will be the moderator for today's session that we will dedicate to storyboards, and we will actually see how to build the structure for your e-learning. And to cover this topic, I have invited a super expert in this field, Emily Wood, Managing Director at Serenity Learning. Hi, Emily. How are you doing?
Hi, Paulina. I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks a lot for asking. And also, I wanted to mention for anybody who doesn't know about iSpring, so we are your starting point in e-learning. We provide an authoring tool and an LMS, as well as the unparalleled support on your way to the big results. But we also believe the tools are only a part of the great success, and that's why we provide these webinar series. So I hope you enjoy this session. And Emily, passing the mic over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and greetings from Tacoma, Washington in the United States. I saw there are a few people from this general area, so thanks for being up so early in the morning with me. So I am going to share a presentation with us. All right, so today I am here to talk to you about storyboards and how we're going to use storyboards to build e-learning. So if you don't know me already, my name is Emily Wood, and we made a joke a couple of years ago when I got my PMP that I now have more acronyms after my name than the entire length of my full legal name. So I have a master's in instructional science. This past year, I got the CPTD from ATD. I'm also a PMP, an Agile certified practitioner, and a Captivate developer, one of the few out there. It's because I'm a Mac user, so I will always have lots of love for Captivate. All right, so I consider myself an instructional designer, an e-learning developer, and a project manager because I have done all parts of these different roles in my life. And I was curious, if you were going to describe your role, what would you call yourself? So are you an instructional designer and a learning experience designer? Are you writing the storyboards? Are you the e-learning developer who gets the storyboards? So you're the person who is receiving the results of what we're going to be creating today? Are you the subject matter expert who gets to come in and tell the instructional designers, that's not quite what I meant? Or are you something else? And if you're something else, tell us in chat, how do you define your role? All of the hats, oh, Brad, near and dear to my heart as well. Absolutely. Manager in all the roles, all the hats. Yep, I actually found myself in that position a few years ago and ended up writing a book about it called eLearning Department of One because I found myself literally doing everything end to end. So I think that that was a big trend in the industry about 7 years ago when people were in this position that companies said, oh, look, we want to go online, let's do all of this. And then, of course, 2 years ago with the world and all of the changes, everybody immediately was taking all of this online facilitation that we were, or all the in-person facilitation that we were doing and moving it all online. So absolutely, I'm right there with you. All right, so we have an awesome mix here. About 50% of us consider ourselves instructional designers, 13% are e-learning, 6% are just one, and then we've got 36%, and I'm going to guess that those are the ones that were the end-to-end covering everything. So awesome. All right, so let's take a look here at what we're going to talk about today. So first off, I want to talk about content structure, and I'm going to define a little bit what that means so you understand what I'm saying by that. Then we're going to talk about how we're going to take the right storyboard template for the content structure that we're talking about, and then marry those two together. Then we're going to discuss how to collect feedback on the storyboard from stakeholders, and we are going to end up with using the storyboard for quality assurance testing. Now, if you want to get a little bit ahead of what I'm talking about before I actually get there, you'll see down at the bottom of the chat, there's a series for handouts, or it actually might be in the top of the screen for you. And on there, you'll get the 2 different templates that I'm going to talk about. So if you want to download those and take notes on them or use them in the future or alter them, you're absolutely welcome to do so. And then there's a handout that sort of covers the high points of what I will be talking about with you today. All right. So first of all, let's talk about content structure. So what do we mean by content structure? And I want to go to polls. Oops, I'm sorry. All right. So when we talk about content structure, there are, Paulina, do you see the poll that I created on that? Maybe I didn't. When we talk about content structure, there are a couple of different ways that we can look at this. So there are two sort of main divisions that we have here. And the first is content centric. So with content centric, we're going to think about something in the way that everybody's going to learn it the same way. So for example, oh, hey, Paulina, would you be able to help them see the handouts? I know where to see them on my side, but I'm not sure how to see them on the other side.
Sure, I will enable all handouts for everybody. Okay?
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right. So when we're talking content centric, that's something that we want everybody to learn it the same way. And a lot of times this is going to be like using a new software that we're rolling out. So if I'm engineering a piece of software and I'm going to teach it to everybody, then I want them to all learn kind of the same path through it and then see how it works. The other thing that we might do is like teaching somebody project management. So something I do a lot of, if I'm going to teach somebody how to do a project, I'm going to do the 5 steps in the order. So I'm going to teach it to you in the way of going through a project. Now, the other way that we can come at our content is by going through a learner-centric point of view. And with learner-centric, I get a bunch of different options about how I want to do that. So that's kind of an umbrella term for a bunch of different ways that I can divide up my content. But in this one, we're going to take an approach to designing the content that's going to focus on the person who's at the other end. So, you know, with e-learning in particular, when it's not VILT like this, where you could ask me questions if I said something that didn't make sense, with asynchronous e-learning, we as the instructional designers and then as these end-to-end developers have to think of every question that a learner is going to have and every different way that they want to come at it. VILT is virtual instructor-led training. So like we're talking about the same thing at the same time and I'm here for you. Whereas asynchronous would be, I write up the content with a subject matter expert, but you can't real-time talk to the subject matter expert about what it is that they're talking about at that time. So with the learner-centric point of view, we're taking the strategic approach to designing the experience where we're relying less on the content and more on what the learner, him or herself, actually knows and how to get that information to them in a way that meets them where they're at. It allows the learner to have a lot more control. So as an adult learner, I appreciate being able to come in and, you know, take a test or figure out what my actual gaps are. So like I love language learning, and I saw somebody in here's from Frankfurt and I really thought about going with my German, but I know I have a horrible accent in it. With programs like Duolingo, I can go in there and I can take the tree and I can learn all the lessons. But as somebody who minored in Latin American literature, I speak Spanish fairly well. So I would love to have the ability to go in and then take a test and then just have the gaps for the areas where I'm not meeting expectations. So if my subjunctive or my pluperfect isn't exactly at the level that I would like it to be able to work in a business environment, I'd like to jump right to that level. So let's look at a couple of different ways that we can do learner-centric choices. So the first one, and the one that you probably are the most familiar with, is adaptive testing. And that's what I was just talking about. At the beginning of the course, we give the learner a pre-test and he or she can go in and say, you know, here's what I think the answer is. And if you want to get really sophisticated in it, you can even have them put their level of certainty as to the answers that they're going through. And so we could say to them, take this test. If you get everything right and you're 100% sure, you can just jump to the end of it. If you take the test and you get things right, but you weren't so sure and you're going to admit to the fact that you were guessing, then you could come in and have just the parts of it where you'd have the choice. The next way that we could look at it is problem-based. And problem-based is where we're going to set this in a complex real-world situation. So a lot of times you're going to hear this as something like, a scenario-based or a branching course. So I'm standing in a retail store and I overhear my coworker swear at another coworker. So this could be a situation where we're getting into they're offending them, or something that wouldn't meet with our HR standards, or it could be that that's the way that they talk to each other and they're actually really good friends. So I would need to go in as the HR person, ascertain why that's happening, and then set the expectations with both parties as to how I would prefer that they behave on the job. Now, project-based is something that we see a little bit more in grade school, but it is something that we'd be able to implement in our e-learning as well. And this is where we have a dynamic classroom approach that the people can obtain deeper knowledge through self-study. So it could be something like, I want you to write an essay about how this different thing affected you. And the person can go do research and then come back and write it up. And then we could use our social learning tools for them to come and comment on each other and give them feedback as to, is this going to work in a real world situation? Is this what I was looking for? All the different ways like that. And then finally, case-based. So this is a lot of how like MIT and Harvard teach their students, where here's a situation that we're in, how would you make a decision? And then you ended up with, this is what really happened in the real world, and this is the analysis of how we think that worked. So it's kind of like that next step from problem-based, because it's allowing them to have the additional context of what really happened in the real world. And it gives a little bit more of that grounding for the learner in terms of it did really happen, whereas problem-based could be a contrived situation. Kind of depends on the scope of what you're teaching and then the sophistication of the learner. All right, so we're going to take this different decision that we're going to make about content-based, or sorry, about whether we're going content-based or if we're going to go learner-centric, and we're going to apply that to how we're going to build our storyboards. So the first thing that I like to do, because I am a super non-linear person, I used to joke when I was in school that the best way to get me to write a paper was to have me write it backward. So I'd write for a couple of hours and then I'd come back in and fill back what I was actually trying to say later. So it takes me about 2 hours to get to the point, and then I can figure out what it was that I wanted to talk about. So what I like to do is I like to start off my courses by building a map. So the first thing that we want to do is make a decision about whether or not we actually need a storyboard. So let's talk about this. I think I just didn't save these polls that I made. Okay, so have you ever created a storyboard? Go ahead and answer the poll now. So when I say storyboard, I mean something that plans out what you're going to be building in your course.
Actually, the poll is available and it's going on right now in the polls section.
Awesome.
Thank you. And we do have a few times as a leading answer so far.
Okay. So the term storyboard isn't new to people. That's
actually
good.
You've
All right, so we got a pretty good set of answers now at this point. So 100 people have done it at least a few times. The next biggest one is absolutely all the time with 15%. I don't think so for 15%, and definitely not for 17%. All right, how do we decide? So again, not a super linear person. I built a flow chart, and the flow chart helps me make this decision about whether or not I need a storyboard. And this is on the handout in case it's something you want to use in the future. So the first thing that I need to decide is, are you the SME? So 10 points. Who can tell me in chat, what is SME? And this is like, whose line is it anyway? So the points don't really matter. Subject matter expert. Awesome. So if I were going to write a course on storyboards, I would say I'm the subject matter expert. All right. So I know the answer to this. It's going to be yes or no, right? The next thing that I'd need to know is the subject matter expert available for agile development? All right. So this is kind of an interesting one. Now, I've had situations where SMEs are not super thrilled that they have to work with me, because they say, well, you know what, I'm a teacher. Why do I need an instructional designer to come in and help me? Because I already know how to teach people. I like to come when I start a new relationship with a subject matter expert to talk to them about really what I'm bringing to the table and what they're bringing to the table. So I'm not, oh, I love that, Zach. SME has so many excuses. So there are lots of courses on building a relationship with your subject matter expert. It is absolutely fundamentally one of the best things that you can do for your job is to get your SMEs to like working with you. So spend some time, and if you are your own SME, then, you know, buy yourself chocolate or whatever it is that makes you happy. In my case, it's very high-end coffee. So find that thing that is going to make the SME happy to work with you and give them a positive working relationship. Now, SMEs fall into two kind of categories for me. There's the SME that's like the research SME who's available, who maybe works in the same office with you or is by a computer all the time, and you have the ability to reach out to them whenever you want. And then you can have discussions with them about, hey, I want to use the successive approximation model, or I want to use Llama, or I want to use Scrum, whatever way that you prefer to do your agile design, where you're checking in with this person constantly. Is this what you wanted? Is this the way that we would go about doing this? So that's one type of SME. Now, the other type of SME that you have is that SME who's out in the field. So they're working with the target audience, or they're traveling, or they're speakers, or they're writing a book and they're, you know, out at Walden Pond. They're the people that are less accessible to you, that can't necessarily give you feedback on the schedule that you would like. Now, in that case, I like to time box with them and say something like, okay, I think I'm going to need about 20 hours of your time to build this project. So your choice is, you can meet with me for 15 hours right now, and then I need 2 hours of review at the end, or I want to meet with you 4 hours a week for the next 5 weeks. It's the same 20 hours. Like, your amount of time to finish this project is not going to vary based on the style of project management that we have. It's going to vary based on kind of what the gap is between what we decided at the beginning of this project and what you're going to get at the end of this project. So in that case, you need to know what their availability is. And of course, if you're the SME, you have perfect availability, so you can do anything you want. The next thing I need to know is the content difficult to follow? And basically, you can boil this down to the level of you can boil this down to the level of cognitive load. So the easier the content is, the lower the cognitive load threshold, the less difficult it will be for you to map it out. So in that case, I could say something like teaching you basic math, you know, adding, subtracting, addition, those kinds of things are fairly easy to do, whereas teaching you how to integrate in calculus is a higher cognitive load. And so it would be more difficult for me to map out in my head how to do that. So yeah, and this is, again, totally based on your audience. So if I were going to teach a bunch of physicists how to do integration, that's going to be a lot easier than it is going to be for teaching 6-year-olds. So again, grain of salt, this is something that I do at the beginning of every project. I make this decision. This isn't like a one and done, I'm always going to storyboard, or I'm never going to storyboard kind of decision. The next thing is it time consuming to make changes? So if I'm using a rapid authoring tool like Rise or Domino or PowerPoint, whatever it is that I'm developing in, that I can fairly easily go in and make changes, that's one hand. If it's something where it's going to take me forever, so like if I'm building variables into Captivate and doing JavaScript calls or whatever kind of insanity I've decided, my coding skills are basically at the level of my level of insanity at any given day. If I'm doing those different things, it's not the type of thing where it's like, oh, you know what, slide 27 should now be slide 2, and now none of my variables work, and I have to like recode everything. That's something I'm going to want to take into account. So by answering these 4 questions, I should have the ability now to decide whether or not I want to go straight to development or if I want to create a storyboard. So again, am I the SME is where I'm going to start it. If I'm not, or if I am the SME, then I just go down the right side of the screen. If I'm not, then I can go down the left side of the screen. And then each of these helps me decide which way I want to go. So if I am not the SME and the SME is available for agile development, but the content is difficult to follow, then I want to create a storyboard. If it's not difficult to follow and it's not difficult to make changes, then I might go straight to development. So again, totally based on every unique audience that I'm working with and every individual piece of content that I'm working with. All right, so what questions do you have about making these decisions? Thank you, Darlene. Okay, so this is basically to get you to that point to make the decision about whether or not you're going to storyboard. Again, it's not deal breaker. If you decide, you know what, I want to create a storyboard here because it just makes my life easier, have at it. So we've decided on our content structure. We've made the decision if we want to storyboard. Now we're going to say, with the content structure that I've chosen, what is the storyboard structure that I want to do? All right, so the first thing that I want to talk about is mapping. So I mentioned that I am not a very linear person. So what I like to do is say, all right, in this case, I am going to create a pretest. I want people to come in here and answer a series of questions, and then based on how they do on those questions, it determines whether or not they're going to take each of the pieces of content. So in this case, I've got a 4-question test. If I passed all 4 of those questions in the pretest, then I can go straight to the exit quiz and I'm done. So I use this for things like, I don't know, bloodborne pathogens. One of those compliance courses that every year I have to give the federal government a report from my learning management system that says, Emily still knows what she should do with bloodborne pathogens. So it's straightforward, it's annual. Once you've taken this course like 3 times, you could probably teach it. I used to have people that would tease me where they'd record themselves speaking along with my voiceover because they watched the same course so many times. Now, if it's the kind of thing where there may be gaps in knowledge, like I was mentioning my Spanish language grammar, maybe I really need help on pluperfect, and that's what section B is here, then I can go do those lessons on it before I now skip out to the quiz if I knew everything else. So this is one way to come at it. So this is that sort of pretest idea, and then the content is offered kind of at the level that the learner needs it. The other way that we have is this problem-based way. So for a problem-based way of coming at it, I give the person a problem, and then they get a series of decisions, and then they can use those decisions to go down all of these different paths. So in this case, the best choice that somebody could make would be 1, 3, 10, and 12. The worst choice that somebody could make, I messed up my colors here, would be 1, 2, 5, and 8. So I can then come in here and I could set up point values based on each of these. So maybe I want to do +1 for every answer that they get right and -1 for every answer that they get wrong. And then here at the end, I can work out something that would tell the learner kind of where they were on a metric of how effective or ineffective it was. All right, so let's take a look here. From adaptive learning quiz, would a pre-quiz differ from the final quiz? Yes, I would have it differ from the final quiz, because with the pre-quiz, the goal would be to figure out if they conceptually understand what it is that we're talking about. And I'm going to use the learning objectives that I have for the different parts of the content to be what I'm using to determine whether or not they need to see that content. So my quiz questions at the beginning might be something like, when you come across a person with a bloody nose, which of the following are the steps that you want to take? And the person would select the steps. And at the end, my final quiz, I'm not a big fan of like multiple choice quizzes as my final quizzes. My final quiz in something like bloodborne pathogens would be like, here's a day where you're the assigned safety person. Here's a number of different situations that you could be in related to blood, navigate each situation and score, in the top percentile, one of the green leveled boxes. So you could use that for how you want to set it up. It depends really a lot on how your organization handles these things. So for something where it's a government compliance test, they may have already given you the final test that they want to use. I would use my learning objectives for the course that I'm building to meet that test as what I'm using in my pre-test, whereas I might use the test they gave. And again, I prefer non-traditional testing whenever given the option. So I would make the pre-test more like the traditional test where it's, match the terms together or do the different things. And then the actual test, I want the learner to tell me in the way that they would, that they can actually do this in the real world. So on your job, with your level of responsibility, what are the implications of the training that we have here? Now, again, that does take a lot of time to plan out, and you have to make that decision as the instructional designer whether or not that has value for the specific level of content that you're creating and the audience that you're creating it for. Okay, so is the pre-test harder, easier, or of equal difficulty? Well, that one, again, it depends a lot on the specific use case that you're doing. So I would say if it's a government test, that it's probably equal difficulty. So, in this situation, what would you do? Select all the right answers. If it's something where it's like you're in charge of the nuclear power grid, for example. So the pre-test might be something like, given this set of situations, put these items in order, and some sort of sequencing or categorization kind of thing. But my post-test is going to be, here's a picture of the nuclear board for the electric grid for the city of Austin. I want you to go through and load balance it, given that there was a tornado in Oklahoma and we've lost 40% of the grid. Or we should use California since they seem to brown out a lot. So you're doing this in California. What are you doing to keep the lights on for as much of the state, or how are you prioritizing the energy levels for hospitals over residential? So in that case, my exit exam would be much more difficult because at this time it's the practical application of the knowledge of the content. So my pre-test is, do you actually understand the content? And the post-test is, can you apply the content to what you're doing on your job? Because ultimately, the reason that we're creating any kind of training is to ensure that in the situation where the learner is experiencing what they actually need to do, that they're doing it in the safest, most effective, and compliant way with what the organizational standards are. Did I say +1 for correct and -2 for incorrect? Only if I was being really mean. I usually do +1, -1. Let's see. Yep, I think that was all of the questions there. So if I missed your question, I will catch it at the end because I know we have some time at the end to go through it. So when I'm doing my storyboarding, if I'm doing one of these learner-centric presentations, so either this view or this view, I actually have this as part of what my deliverables are. So I keep all of my materials together, and at the end, when I'm submitting this off to the SME, they get this in addition to the literal storyboard itself. So what are my storyboard options? I've got two main ways that I come at looking at my storyboards, and the first one is the text-based storyboard. This is the one that I use the most often, and we'll talk in the QA section about why that is. So I know what you're thinking. Crazy person, you have two rows that talk about numbers. The reason for that is what we see here. So these numbers here are the literal slide number, right? So there's slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, because when I'm coding in whatever platform or tool that I happen to be using, you have all of these numbers here. But in the reality of it, when I'm going in and I'm coding something and I'm saying, well, how did I get to 8? What I really want to know is I chose 1, and then I chose answer A, and then I chose answer B, and then I chose answer A again, right? And so what I do here is I have an interaction number that helps me with mapping these. So question 23 here is actually if I chose answer choice A from slide 22. So it jumps in terms of how my numbering style works. So on here, the slide number, the interaction number, what I'm going to show on screen, how the learner is going to interact with it, and then what's the voiceover that's going to be on here. So most of the training that I do is Captivate because that's the tool that I use the most. So I do typically have voiceover on there. Again, a decision that you would need to make with your SME and your stakeholder before you get to this point. It's a Word file, right? So you can just delete the content on there if you don't want it. So when would I use text-based? I'm going to use it for linear kind of decisions. I'm going to teach you how to add, then I'm going to teach you how to subtract, then I'm going to teach you how to multiply, then I'm going to teach you how to divide. Fairly linear. Content grows in terms of difficulty. easy for me to do in this kind of storyboard. The other one that I'm going to use it for is branching, because it's easier for me to see very quickly where I am in relation to the other questions. So like that Rise scenario tool that they have now, where like the people can talk back and forth, I map that out like I did on the previous slide, where I've got all of the different like flowchart options. And then I also write it in here so that I can come in and see very quickly where all the answers were and how I did that. All right, so the next thing that I have is a visuals-based storyboard. Now, why would I use a visuals-based storyboard? Let's say that we're developing something that it's very important to talk about the way something looks. So like I'm going to go do a video shoot and I want to have different people go through things. I actually learned recently that the original storyboards were for people mapping things out, like at Disney, where they were doing the original cartoons. They would do storyboards to sort of show what it was that was going to happen. And then later that went into film in terms of like, what's the angle that we're going to do these things at and how that's going to be. So for that, yeah, and comic books. So I would use something like this. I also would use it for a simulation. So if I was going to teach you how to service the engine of my Ford vehicle, right? So I've got the engine of my car, right? So the hood's open and I can see all the things in there. I know nothing about engines. So if I start saying crazy things, just let me know. So I've got the engine open, and then I've got my fancy toolbox next to me, which in my case is like a hammer and one screwdriver because I have no fancy tools. But I have all the appropriate level of tools that a person would select. If I pick up tool A, a wrench, and I start using the wrench on the engine here, if I use it on the wrong part of the engine, there are implications to that. So then I would have a very complex mapping branching system behind that would talk about, if you use the hammer and then you use the wrench, does the car blow up or steam come out or whatever? If I use the wrench and then the hammer, what happens? But that's really going to be this kind of situation where you're going to have all of these different variables about what's open or closed or dented or not, kind of based on what the learner is doing there. Now, I built this in PowerPoint. So with PowerPoint, the cool thing about this is this actual area here. So this on yours, you should have a little like thing that's written above here that says that this is what the on-screen is. I can just move these lines so that it's the dimensions that I'm going to have for the slide that I'm creating. So most of the time when you're doing something that's high definition, it's going to be 16 by 9, right? So I could come in here and sort of mathematically figure out roughly 16 by 9 on here. Or if I'm going to do everything mobile based, if it's landscape, I might do it this way. If it's going to be a portrait, then I can move this line over so that it actually fits the way that the visuals are going to look. Then I put the notes on the screen here for what I want to say. Again, I have that slide number and interaction number because I am still doing that mapping that we have before. And then I put all the voiceover text, if I were going to do that, in the notes pane. Now, I realize that the higher level authoring tools have the ability for you to import PowerPoint files into your authoring tool. Please don't do that. It does all kinds of weird things. It's not at the level that we want it to be working. So while this is set up in such a way that you are using PowerPoint, you could theoretically load it in there. Because we've written all of this other stuff on the screen, that wouldn't make sense. If you were going to do it where you're going to directly load it from the PowerPoint, you would want the entire frame of the PowerPoint to be just your content. Now, a note about visuals based. I am not a visual person. I tend to joke that the thing that you want least from me in the world is graphic design. It's just not my thing. Like, you're probably wondering why this is so pink and green. I don't know. It was just the colors that happened to me last week when I was making this presentation. What you want to do here is either be as close as absolutely possible to the actual image that you're going to be using, or you want to go the stick figure route. And like literally I draw like the little stick figure people on here, and then like color over fake hair on them like a 2-year-old drew it, because you don't want your SMEs to get hooked on the fact if you put like an iStock photo or something that you find in one of the free photo sharing sites. you put a picture on there and it's a woman with red hair and they say, oh, no, a redheaded woman would never use this product. She has to be brunette. For whatever reason, I have had issues where the SMEs do not see that FPO that you put on the picture. So yeah, I realize that she's a redhead and you want a brunette, but she's going to be in kind of that sitting, or she's going to be doing whatever the action is that that person's doing. Honestly, I find it's just easier to do stick figures until I know that I'm really close to the final visual. And I only use that FPO, for placement only, kind of marking if it's still the watermarked version of the picture where I need the SME to say, yes, you can use that, and then I go buy it, and then I can put it in there. And then developer notes is going to be all about what I need in terms of like, what's the interactivity on this slide? How is this going to work? All right, so Lynn, what do I use to build these? So the first one that I showed you was Microsoft Word, and the second one that I showed you is Microsoft PowerPoint. So you should have a Word and a PowerPoint file in the handouts where you can literally have these actual ones to use it. How would I calculate the screen dimensions? So the screen dimensions I usually get from going to the device manufacturer. So when I've done the initial needs assessment to determine what it is that I'm using, I have them tell me. So like I have all the different iPhone sizes, and then I have the different laptop sizes depending on what the client wants. And I would use for this, whichever one they think the widest group of their learner base is going to use. For calculating it on the screen in PowerPoint itself, I turn on the rulers and set it to pixels, and then I move the two lines. So if you go into the master slide view, this is the blank slide, you can just move those lines anywhere that would be appropriate based on the dimensions of that particular thing. And I would probably go in there and actually put that in the developer notes on the first slide about this are what the dimensions are for the slide, so that when somebody's setting up to build that in the authoring tool, it's automatically set up at the same dimensions. All right, if you're creating the training, you have no knowledge about what would be the first steps to take. So most of the training that I create, I have literally no knowledge at all about what the content is. So I'm learning the content as the subject matter expert is teaching it to me. If I have the opportunity to see anything else that they've written or watch presentations that they've given before, I like to start with that. If it's the kind of situation where this is brand new and they're just figuring out, then I would go in and like set up like interview questions. Actually, there's a fantastic course in LinkedIn Learning about being a documentary film person, like how you interview people. And I found that to be very helpful for me in building rapport with my SME and for eliciting questions in a way that didn't feel very confrontational, because I wanted to get information from them, but it was really to build the training, not because I was questioning their authority. And the documentary point of view helped me better work on that for myself. It's in the learning path that's called How to Become a Documentary Filmmaker. And it's like the 5th course in, and it's something like interviewing your subjects, I think is what it's called. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So to Dan's point here, he said that he would interview the SME on camera. I do that too, because I've found that having the voice of the SME in the training adds to their credibility. I mean, obviously, they're written as the author of the course, right? Because as an instructional designer, we're basically ghostwriters. But I like having them as like a talking head at some point in the course for things where the person would come in and be that person of authority. And so I have an example of this woman is very passionate talking about why we don't hit children. Yes, I know what you're thinking, but this is a social services project. So she tells me this story where basically the gist of it is, you know, there's a child riding a bicycle and the child falls off the bike. What do? Do you run up to them and say, stop falling off your bike? Like, why can't you balance? What's wrong with you? Well, of course not. And that seems very jarring. And people are all like, wait, what is she talking about? Of course I wouldn't yell at my kid like that. And so then the question that they use at the end is, so when your child is misbehaving, why do you yell at them, stop doing that? Like, it's not like they're misbehaving because they want to misbehave. And these are little children. And so it's all about, how you kind of reframe the way that you deal with what we perceive as bad behavior to work with somebody in a way that supports them to get to the level of behavior that you want. And while I could have explained that in the course, there was really no better way of doing it than having her on screen very passionately talking about why she felt the way she felt. Now, in this particular case, she was very strongly against being on camera. And so while I had the recording of her saying this, what I ultimately ended up doing was using this cartooning software called Vyond, V-Y-O-N-D, and making little cartoon version of her, and then using the voice from the recording that I made, putting it under the cartoon, and then having the cartoon happen. And she said that it was really strange for her that she had this like rock star moment where she was out teaching a higher level class and somebody ran up and they said, "Oh man, have you seen this cartoon? Because the girl looks just like you and sounds just like you." And so in that case, it was a nice way to sort of reinforce the authority of the SME and make them see kind of the value of doing something like asynchronous e-learning, because the learner now came to her more advanced class with that body of knowledge that she needed to be able to get to that next higher level. All right, so we've got the idea of the storyboard. We know what it is that we want to do. Now, why are we ultimately creating a storyboard? We're creating the storyboard because we need feedback. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've met with somebody and I've talked through a concept with them and I think that I'm pretty confident in what it is that we're talking about. And I've given them back the storyboard and they've said, "Wow, not sure how you made that leap." Or, "Yeah, the way that you want to talk to those engineers like they're preschool teachers, that's not going to go over at all." So having the storyboard is ultimately a good way of taking what we've internalized, this content from the SME, and then giving it out to a series of people for them to give us feedback. And I kind of divide this feedback into two different categories. So the first one is the subject matter expert and my sponsor. So like the people who are responsible for why I'm building the training that I'm building. And in that, they can do a content review, is this materially accurate? And then they can do this interaction review of, yeah, that's a good way to reinforce this, or, you kind of missed the mark, the learners aren't going to understand what you're trying to do here. Now, the other group of people that are going to give us feedback are my QA testers. And they're the people that are going to go in and say, like, literally, can I get through this course? Like, is it functionally linear? And then at the end of this course, like, does it make any sense? Like, did I get out of this what I wanted to get out of this? And I'm going to use the storyboard to help me do that. So before we go there, how many of you are using QA? So is quality assurance testing part of your process? And if you're doing QA, how are you going about doing it? Always. I want to come work with you, Philip. I was talking to somebody recently and they told me, at the beginning they build these beautiful project plans and then there are all these like spikes where you have to go off and figure out other things or different things happen and the deadlines never change, just the amount of quality assurance testing does, which is not something I recommend, but it happens. All right, so we've got a few people who don't know about QA or they aren't doing it. We have people who are doing it but don't have a formal process behind it. We've got some generic, and then we've got some people using the storyboard. All right, so I am going to advocate that you do start a formal QA process because it'll make your life easier in terms of getting feedback and figuring out, like, every time I use this type of interaction, there's a problem with it, or in these different ways that I'm doing something, it isn't really working for me. So when I am working in my storyboard, there are these 3 different files that I want to use. So the process map. Nobody asked me what I was using to build my process map, which I thought was kind of funny. So the process map, there are 2 programs that I think are really fantastic at handling this, and both of them are online collaborative, so you don't have to be in the same place as your SME to do them. One of them is called Miro, like the Spanish painter. And the other one's called Mural, like I'm going to paint a mural on the wall. They're both fantastic. They have some strengths in each of them has individual strengths. Either way that you go, the basic stuff is the same, where you can build big elaborate plans, and it kind of has that ability for you to go, infinite wall space, infinite numbers of colorful sticky notes that you can do on it. And so with that, you'd be able to see is Miro and Mural. With either one of those, you'd be able to come in, build out the map the way that you want, rearrange it, and then give your SMEs and your sponsors and everybody accounts where they can come in and they can move things around. And then when you log back in, it actually shows you the changes that each individual made, and then you can have a discussion with them about whether it works or not. Or because I find that people make decisions and then they're not sure why they made them, I have them make other sticky notes and then explain why they're moving stuff around so that we know what it is that we want. So with that one, we use one of these online collaboration tools. Word files, that one's pretty easy. Turn on track changes. You see everybody who made changes. I like sending that out to each of the reviewers concurrently. And then I use the aggregator within Word so that it overlays everybody's feedback. And then we have a meeting all together where, Mark said this, Jerry said this, Emily said this, you all had comments on this first activity. Let's talk about how to fix it. We fix it, and we have an updated storyboard. And then a word on doing the content review with SMEs. For whatever reason, I have found that my SMEs are not great at reading voiceover text. And so if you're not used to writing for voiceover, that's something to think about getting more involved in. But what I actually started doing was recording myself reading the voiceover. And because that way they got a feeling for what it was like, because they'd say things like, I'm not going to come up with a good example here, but like the Pistons hit the fourth shockwave of the fourth thing and the blah, blah, blah. And they've got these like 45 word sentences. And you're like, where's the person supposed to breathe? Like, you can't do that. And so when they read what I write, and they're like, your sentences are so choppy. And I'm like, yeah, but listen to me say it. So if I talk to you, I'm going to have some sentences that are going to have like 25 words. And then I'm going to have a sentence with 4. And that, like, you need that variance and the cadence of it for it to sound natural. 32 words maximum. Okay. So whatever it is that you want to use, I actually just started using Lucidchart too. Whatever it is that you, however it is that you work with them, I do recommend sort of figuring out what they do or don't do, because I have found that my SMEs will sign off on stuff. So sometimes I'll put Easter eggs in just to see if they're paying attention and actually reading all of the columns. Now, PowerPoint files is where it gets a little bit dicey, because PowerPoint doesn't have a fantastic review tool. And so in that one, you may have noticed in my PowerPoint file here, I actually have little, I call them sticky notes, but little blue boxes outside the frame here. And I would write the reviewer's name in each one of them, where they can come in and say whatever it is that they want to say so that we can do it. Because if they come in here and they edit like the voiceover text down here at the bottom, you can't tell who edited it or why they edited it. So I prefer that they either use the comment feature where they like click on it and have the little comment button, or they write it in their little reviewer box so that I can come in and sort of easily see what kind of feedback that they're giving me. All right, so then from there, the other thing that I do is use it in quality assurance testing. So in quality assurance testing, it's that same layout that we used before, and then I'm going to add a status field and then a QA notes field where the person can put pass or fail, and then have this. So the version that I gave you in the Word file, it already has, who's the reviewer, when did they do it, what kind of system are they on, and then I aggregate that to determine, oh, in Firefox on all the platforms, it's doing this weird thing. I need to go figure that out, or, it passes on some but not others. This is my least favorite part, honestly, is going back and figuring out how to get it to work on all the different systems. So if I've created something too complicated, some of the browsers don't like it as much. So the more that you can tighten down and limit the number of systems that you're using, the easier this QA part is. But to help you figure out where it's going wrong. All right, so I left us about 6 minutes for questions. So Paulina, what did I miss as we were going through here?
Been so active uncovering the questions that so far we have none. Can you say, yeah.
The name of my book is eLearning Department of One. It's from ATD Press. Department. And there is a whole big section on storyboarding. Yeah, so we got, sorry, and now I'm seeing questions come in. All right, so where does the storyboard come in the process? So I would do an initial needs assessment. And again, because I'm a consulting company, usually the first thing I do is meet with people to sort of make sure that they have a training need. And then I would write up, here's sort of my general, what I think you need to do. And then that's the contract file, right? So once we're under contract, the storyboard is the first thing I do after that initial needs assessment. So we agree it's a training issue that needs to be solved. Then I write the storyboard. So it's fairly early in the design process. What do you think about giving participants a map that they can enter at any point? It would depend on the content. So like I'm doing something right now where it's like, can you navigate through a retail sales day? And so they get different parts of the store and the customers have different problems in different parts of the store. So like in the printer section, they want to buy a printer, and at the customer service desk, they want to do a return. I let the learners pick how they want to navigate through the store because it doesn't really matter which customer order they hit it in as long as they see all the customers. So if your content is leveled, so like everything is equally difficult, I don't see any reason why doing that. Or you could do it kind of like Mario, where it's like, you know, we're going to start in the printer area, answer all the printer questions. And once you've graduated from that, now I'm going to take you to the copier area because now you know about the printers and you can do that. Oh yeah, I presented with iSpring in the past. So I have other webinars
And hopefully
with
more
Paulina
to come.
if you ever want to see that. Well, hopefully more to come. Can you say one more time what you use for QA and the mapping tools? Yeah, so Miro, Spanish painter, Miro, and Mural. I don't know why they have such similar names, but it makes it easy. As a consultant, they have a really cool feature for Mural for me to be able to use it. As in-house, I've used Miro and I've used Lucid Charts, which somebody else mentioned. Where is the storyboarding section?
In your book, I guess.
I'm not, do you know what that? Oh, I think it's like chapter 5, maybe. Let's see here. Copy the recording. Yep. Oh yeah. So this is fantastic for micro learning. And with that one, I actually was just having this discussion. I've been teasing lately that I don't think Paulina wants me to go this route, but that I'm going to write a course called Storyboard Inception that talks about, like, you write sort of the master storyboard for the content arc of what you're going to do, and then you have the nested storyboards in those of the content, and then you have the nested storyboards in those for like your Beyond videos. And so it was like, which level of storyboard are you? And you can keep going deeper. Yeah, with micro learning, it's great. And I do one of these Word or PowerPoint files for each micro learning file. And then I have either like another storyboard on top of that that's like, this is the content order, or this is how those connect together, or I do it on that whiteboarding software where I talk about how that is too. What has been your career and training path to reach your current position? Okay, so I have kind of a weird career path. My undergraduate degrees are in international business and Latin American literature because, you know, why not? I ended up working for a planetarium software company for a couple of years and then moved to a company that ultimately got purchased by National Geographic, like the magazine. And while I was working there, I did telephone technical support on projects, and we ended up hiring a call center because our product was very, very popular. It was like a English language learning product. And when we hired the call center, they sent me out to teach everybody how to do it. And my boss said, "Hey, you seem to like that and you're pretty good at it. Did you know that that's a degree?" And I was like, "No, I had no idea." So then I went to night school and got my master's while I was doing that. And then I bounced around for a bit. Did a stint with the military developing a competitive product to Rosetta Stone. And then I worked at a museum doing project management. And then I went to a company to set up their e-learning department and did the LMS. And that's where I wrote Department of One. And then while I was there, I started my company and have been taking on clients since then. So kind of all over the map. There's this joke that you don't become, like, no 5-year-old says, "I want to be an instructional designer." It's this sort of job you happen into. So the accidental instructional designer, and I'm very much one of those. Do you typically offer a template for content organization so that the training modules follow, the learners know what to expect? I don't. I typically let the learner sort of find it as they go through it. So I'm not a fan of like, in this course, you will learn the following. I know I did that here, and it was because I wanted to make sure that you knew what you were coming to in case you just found out about this and then like clicked right in and you wondered what I was going to talk about. Um, but I don't typically put that in the course for the learners. Thank you all so much. It was wonderful meeting you, and I look forward
Thank
to
you so
hearing from
much
you in the
for the
future.
wonderful session, Emily, as always. And yes, thanks to everyone coming today. Hopefully, you found this 1 hour a super valuable one because I sure did. And we will see you at the next session. Bye, everybody, and bye, Emily.
Bye.